Today in episode 69 of the podcast, we will be reviewing the film Until Dawn and the first 3 episodes of Andor Season 2. We'll also be giving the rundown of the top stories of the week, including the Academy cracking down on voters not watching the nominated films. I'm Brad, he's Josh, and this is We'll Bring the Popcorn.
As always, before we jump into the news this week, please don't forget to give us a like and subscription on YouTube. Hit that notification bell so you're getting our episodes when they drop each and every Monday. If you're listening to us in the audio room, please don't forget to give us a 5-star review. It really helps elevate the profile of the show. And don't forget to go to willbringthepopcorn.com where you can get access to all of our archive footage, all of our social media information, as well as our merch store so you can continue to help support the podcast in that way. We can't thank you enough for your continued support.
And this is your final reminder to enter our giveaway. We have 2 $25 Gold Star gift cards along with a bottle of Mike's Hot Honey and Extra Hot Honey. And we also have a movie trivia game for every single person that wins. You have a really good chance of winning, so get your entries in. You have until May 3rd. We will announce it on the May 5th episode. So go to willbringthepopcorn.com/giveaway to get your entries in today.
So we want to jump into our first news story of the week, and you mentioned it in the intro to the show, but it looks like the Academy, the people responsible for the Oscars and everything are finally cracking down on some Academy members who are responsible for voting for these awards. We talked previously before that, a lot of them were admitting that they weren't watching everything that they were voting on, and they were kind of just voting for their friends. Some of them were talking like, we don't really even watch animated features. We just kind of vote for one that we know. And it was kind of casting a little bit of a dark cloud on the awards and, the integrity of the voting. And it feels like the Academy's kind of finally put their foot down and have kind of changed what they want to do with the people that have the right to vote for these things.
Yeah, you kind of expect with anything, there's going to be a little favoritism where, all right, my friend's nominated, I'm going to give them a vote, or I'm going to do this. But yeah, they were just flat out saying, hey, I didn't watch any of them. Yeah, I avoid the animated films. They're for my kids. So, I don't care to watch them. I just give a vote to whoever. And that's not right. I mean, this is the biggest award that you could win as someone in the industry. And so it needs to be done right. Like if you're, how many favorite films or actors or actresses or people that won it just because they're more known and people know it. Like it kind of takes down from them their reward because, okay, you didn't even watch a film I in, but you voted for me to win and stuff. And yeah, just how they so casually this past year just saying, like, yeah, I didn't watch them. I don't watch anything. I don't watch the nominees. Or they'll say, like, I didn't vote for this person because I think they already have an Oscar and they didn't. The person that they thought, and I think this came from multiple voters anonymously, said, I didn't vote for them because they already won an Oscar, but that person never won an Oscar. So they could potentially have never won an Oscar because people think they have, and they're not going to vote for them because of it.
Yeah, it's just a terrible practice when it comes to, something like that. And, a lot of people kind of, poo-poo on the Oscars a little bit and thinking like, it's a popularity contest. This is kind of proving, lending some credence to the people that kind of feel that way. Like, people just openly admitting that they're voting for their friends, and it kind of just casts doubt on the whole process. Like these past Oscars weren't without their controversies too. Like some of the movies that won awards, a lot of people were upset by the movies that won, and the film that just won Best Picture. I'm drawing a blank on it now. Honora, I believe is what it was called. Like winning, and a lot of people were upset about that. And
Amelia Perez winning so much.
It had a ton of controversy around it too, but it should go to, what people think is the best movie of the year, right? And I don't think that it's a fair practice the way that this was being applied for everything. And hopefully now we get a little bit more cleaner voting process going forward. Like they're even talking about taking some extreme measures, like at least for them, extreme's kind of a bold way of phrasing it, but like apparently they're supposed to be using this app to watch all the films so they can track that, who's watching and who's voting now, like for stuff like that. And if you don't use the app to watch something, you have to fill out a bunch of forms and stuff declaring where you were and when you watched it and where you watched it to kind of, alleviate you having to use this app to watch everything. And it's just, I'm glad that they're kind of putting their foot down with it, but we'll see how it all works out moving forward.
Yeah, and they said if you don't use that app and if you don't fill out the forms to say where you watch it at, you don't get to vote. So it's good on them for doing it. It's definitely going to be interesting for like next year because of course Sinners is doing incredibly well right now, but the Academy has generally not been that favorable to horror winning anything. Of course, you have The Substance winning some things at the Oscars, and of course, Demi Moore won a lot of awards outside of the Oscars past that, but Sinners is one a lot of people think could be in a good running for a lot of stuff at next year's Oscars, so we'll see if that changes anything like that, because you do want it to be fair. You're always going to have those people, especially probably the older ones, who may not care. They'll just vote for their friends and stuff, but there should be some sort of fairness. There's always going to be that percentage that just do it based on who they know and who their friends are or how attached and tied to the productions they are, but this is a step forward towards making it a little bit more fair.
Yeah, it's not going to be a perfect process, but if they clean up some of this stuff, and hey, if you're looking for an even number and a couple people, happen to not, pull their own weight, I got two guys right here that'll volunteer to, take on that responsibility too. So Academy, if you're watching, like, hook us up. We'll do you proud. We'll watch everything and, vote properly for it. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm glad they're taking steps to at least clean some of that up. And it's a shame that, some what could be Oscar-worthy films weren't getting the recognition that they may have deserved if everybody was giving it a fair shot. But, it's been that way for years. A lot of people have, talked for years that the best movies of the year don't even get nominated in a lot of cases, in a lot of people's opinions. They don't go on popularity of movies as much like anymore, because I think all of the top films that were nominated this year, I think only maybe one was in the top 10 to 15 grossing movies of the year, if that. So it's not always resonating with the biggest audience, and I think that's something I hope to see them kind of marry moving forward. In some years it does line up, but there's some years where they're just like, okay, these are the best movies, but half of them are movies nobody's seen, and it's it helps shine a light on some movies like that, but at the same time it's just like, you're not really taking a pulse of what people are enjoying as far as films go too, and I wish they'd find a way to marry that more often.
And sometimes do they need another category for films? That's, you have the best picture of the year that's got its own criteria, but you have the biggest blockbuster of the year. Do you have the biggest something else, just something else? Because you're talking about taking potentially 100 to 200 films a year and breaking it down to 5 nominees, 6 nominees to try to choose one, while you have, supporting actors and main actors, and you have all this. It feels like maybe we need another category potentially, but I don't know exactly how you would break that down and what would be your qualifying criteria, or do they break it down by genres, but then you're going to have a bunch of different ones and it becomes chaos. So there does seem like they're adding that stunt Oscar. It does feel like maybe there needs to be some more adjustments to the awards and how they do things and stuff as well, and also trim the show down from being 3 hours long to maybe a 2-hour run that still gives less of the fluff and the bits, because I don't know how many people really turn into the Oscars for the bits. There's been some good ones. Conan had some decent ones, but for the most part, a lot of the talk about the Oscars is how bad some of the jokes bomb. So could they clean that up as well?
Yeah, there could be some of that, and I know a lot of people were tuning in this year based on some of the musical performances that they were trying to see now. So don't get me wrong, Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo were fantastic.
Well, it makes sense when they're performing the songs that are nominated,
right? But you also get like some other very popular artists that were being advertised as performing, and they were on the show for like a 30-second James Bond tribute, and you're like, well, that wasn't exactly what people were expecting. Kind of felt like a little bit of false advertising just from a lot of the people I was talking to that watched it. They're like, oh, I tuned in, like the movie stuff was cool, but I wanted to see these people perform, and it was like a 30-second thing that they had to wait 2.5 hours for them to show up for, and they kind of felt a little bit cheated of their time. But I get that. It's not a perfect situation, but yeah, there's definitely some fluff that they could trim out of that show to make it a little more digestible for people. That's for sure.
I'm going to move us into our next story. So Toy Story 5 is full in development. We actually got word that Tom Hanks has started recording his lines for Woody. We got a little bit of the story potentially that it might focus on Jesse quite a bit, but we are going to get Woody reuniting with the rest of the gang. But we did get word that Ernie Hudson is going to be replacing Carl Weathers as Combat Carl, which, I mean, that's kind of a good swap out there. Of course, Carl Weathers passed away believe it was 2024, 2023 now. It feels like that goes by way too quickly when we lose somebody like that. But I mean, you go from Creed to a Ghostbuster. Like that's a great swap to me to have him filling in for the late great Carl Weathers.
Yeah, it's a great replacement. I know Toy Story 5 is going to make a ton of money when it comes out.
Make a lot of grown people cry.
Yeah, that's what Toy Story 4 did. It's what Toy Story 3 did in some cases too. But like, yeah, like I know that's one that's a lot of people are going to be looking forward to when it comes out. Getting somebody like Ernie Hudson, who's been around forever as well, to take on that role of Combat Carl. I think that's a great replacement. I know their voices match up fairly well. I think it'd be a smooth transition for that, but it's kind of cool to see them kind of carry on that character and, allow Ernie to, step into their shoes, and I'm sure he'll do a fantastic job of it for sure.
Yeah, because he's not the first. Of course, Slinky Dog was voiced by the great late Jim Varney, and, I think that they kind of reduced his voice roles, but I believe they did have a few extra lines and stuff that came from there, but I don't remember who ended up replacing him. Combat Carl had a little bit more, I guess, of speaking roles with stuff. I mainly remember Combat Carl in the horror short that they did in there, which might have been his introduction. I've watched him so many times with my kids, but now I'm trying to remember exactly how much Combat Carl was in there. But, I mean, this gets verification that he's going to have some sort of part in here that they want to hire Ernie Hudson to voice him. So I'm looking forward to Toy Story 5. I still stick by I want it to end with Andy getting a box of toys at his wife's baby shower, and it's all of his old toys, and just have the entire theater weeping uncontrollably.
Yeah, and Brad wants to have people crying and in lots of emotional pain. So that goes to speak to the kind of person you are. No, I'm just kidding. It would be a cool moment and a cool way to kind of bring it full circle if that's how they were going to end.
Yeah.
End the series. I think that would be the best way possible to end it as well. But looking forward to that movie when it comes out for sure. But now I want to move us into another major event that happened here recently, and that was the Star Wars celebration that took place in Japan. It was a big annual Star Wars celebration. What I love about it is that they move it around internationally. It's not always in the same place every single year. This year was in Japan. And the biggest news story to come out of it was the announcement that Hayden Christensen will be coming back to play Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader in Ahsoka Season 2. So it is confirmed he's coming back for what hopes to be a bigger role, but that may not be the last we see of Hayden Christensen in Star Wars. It sounds like he might have more in store.
Yeah, he's talked up a lot that he really wants to do more as Vader. Like, he sees so many different stories and opportunities that they could do that he's trying to get his own series. He's trying to get a Vader series. We saw him come back in the Obi-Wan series, which we still hope that we get another season of that. But if we get a Vader series where we get to see that darkness of him, like, we know going into A New Hope that he's like the most feared person in the universe because of that, but we never really saw too much of that in the films. That was alluded to, but, Rogue One brought him back at the end, and we saw how brittle he was, and we've got like that. But if we got a Vader series that showed us like right after Episode 3, before Episode 4, and see why he was so feared, do a dark story of Vader would be fantastic, and Hayden is absolutely down to do more as Vader, which is great. Like, we were just talking about it before we started the episode. You got Episode 3 was re-released in theaters, and it's made almost $25 million this weekend. Incredible. It's going to probably finish at number 2 for the weekend. And Episodes 1 through 3, when they first came out, were absolutely loathed and hated. And now Hayden, in the last few years, and especially after the Clone Wars, of what they did with Anakin's story there, and more like Hayden's getting more kind of respect and his flowers and stuff from that. So it's kind of great to see. It took a long time, but it's kind of good to see that. I mean, some of the stuff was bad, but a lot of that you can put on George Lucas's dialogue was really terrible, because I hate sand. Like, that kind of stuff. I love that meme is still around, but it's good to see that these actors who did try to give their all to the characters of what they had to work with are finally getting that recognition. It wasn't as bad. We enjoy you as Anakin. We loved you coming back in Ahsoka Season 1, so it's really fantastic you're coming back in Season 2. And yeah, give us a Vader series.
We got it. We got to have it, man. It's been fun seeing him get his flowers, and the buzz that, the re-release of Episode 3 has gotten. It's done gangbusters at the box office. Like you said, it's done so well. I know a lot of people were excited to go check it out. And, it's cool to see, it come full circle and maybe, them being more open. And I'm willing to bet that the success of this re-release is going to encourage them to put him in more things. So I hope that I'm happy that it's been successful in the re-release, and that hopefully that helps propel us getting more Vader stories and things like that. Because he was one of the more fascinating characters in Star Wars that at the end of the day didn't get a ton of time on screen, at least in episodes 4, 5, and 6. So it's fun to go back and bridge that gap maybe between 3 and 4, like you're talking about, because we got that epic moment in, Rogue One at the end where everybody just lost it when he comes out and just shows that brute force, terrifying version of himself, and would love to see a show about that for sure.
Yeah, but Ahsoka Season 2, we did get word that it will be 8 episodes, all of them written by Dave Filoni, which now, as we talk about how fickle Star Wars fans can be, there's a ton of people hating on that idea that he wrote them all, because at first he was the savior of Star Wars, and now they're hating on his writing and everything else. Like, there's so many different aspects that come into something. Like, we weren't fans of the Acolyte, but we weren't trying to hate on anybody for it, but we wanted just to see there was so much potential in that series that we wanted to see a good story, and we just didn't feel like we got that. And I think Dave is a good creative and everything before it, and Ahsoka is one of his creations and everything else, so having him behind it, I feel very positive about that, and I'm looking forward to see what they do. And it's going to be interesting to see if we do get any other tie-ins to Clone Wars or other Star Wars stuff with that, because Ahsoka did touch quite a bit between Rebels and Clone Wars and stuff, to see exactly what they do with this character, because this could be the final season of Ahsoka, because there is that word that they will be doing a film that kind of wraps up Mandalorian and Grogu, Ahsoka, basically everything that they've done so far in the Star Wars TV realm, in that, connected universe between those characters. We have Mandalorian and Grogu out next year. I believe season 2 of Ahsoka's out next year as well. It could be 2027, just depends on, it either hasn't started filming or it's just starting to film. So you just never know how long post-production is going to take, even on 8 episodes. That's 8 hours of footage. It can take 6 months to edit a 2-hour movie, and you're talking about 8 one-hour episodes potentially. But it's going to be really interesting to see what they do with Ahsoka Season 2, and if this is the final season, where do we leave it? Because we do have quite a bit of mystery of where it left us, because we have, we've got actors being recast because they passed away, and it's going to be playing a bigger part in Season 2. But it's going to be really interesting to see what Ahsoka Season 2 is going to look like, and what exactly we get out of Hayden as Anakin or Vader.
Yeah, it's a lot of things still to be determined, but it's exciting because it's all in the pipeline and coming, and we're looking forward to that. Another interesting bit of news that came out of that was, the Hughes brothers, who worked on, Watchmen and Lost, are in talks to develop a Star Wars TV series. Don't know what that's going to look like yet, but excited to have those people. Lost was one of the biggest shows for years on television, so getting them in the Star Wars room to see what kind of story they want to tell is exciting. There's also talk of Sam Witwer is returning to play Darth Maul in Maul's Shadow Lord. That had a lot of people excited. Maul's one of those characters that, was notorious for getting a very brief amount of screen time in Phantom Menace, but left a huge impact, so much so that they brought him back for Clone Wars and Rebels. And
because everybody can survive being cut in half.
Right, in the most absurd way possible, but they brought it back and made it work, and he's just this beloved character, and getting that animated series as well coming out of that is another big win for Star Wars.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, because they say they're going to use unused ideas by George Lucas that's tied to the characters, but also Star Wars. So we're getting some more of George Lucas in Star Wars here, which we really haven't had a whole lot since he sold it. So they said they didn't give too much away about it, and I don't want to talk about the few aspects they did, just to leave that open and stuff. But it's going to be really interesting to see what of George Lucas's that they're using, because we know he had an idea for like 7, 8, 9, what he would have done if he would have done those. So I don't know if there's anything pulled from there, if it's all still the prequel series era ideas that they have, or they're just maybe pulling from everything that they have from. But that looks really interesting, and I love Sam. I hope he gets to get his live action debut in Star Wars somewhere, because he was also, Vader's apprentice in the Force Unleashed games, if we ever get an adaptation of that and bring him live action into the Star Wars realm. But I'd love to see Sam get that opportunity. He's still got so many opportunities for voice acting. He's played the Emperor. He's done Maul. He's done quite a lot of voice acting within Star Wars, but I still would love him to get that live action. There's just something different that you get to be in person playing somebody in Star Wars.
Yeah, and he's done so many voices over the years. It'd be great to see him get that chance. But it's time to get your shot glasses out and do a drink, because the last little bit of news that came out of it was, Dave Filoni was talking, and he mentioned that he would love to work with Takashi Yamazaki, obviously the creator and creative mind behind Godzilla -1, to work on a Star Wars project as well, and just kind of use his creative mind to develop something as well. And that would be a ton of fun. I know we've advocated hard for like a Star Wars horror element that they've talked about kind of up in the mix. I think he would be great in that realm as well, but I'd be curious to see what they could come up with together if he got put in the fold for Star Wars. That'd be pretty cool.
That was such a great way to bring Godzilla, because you got the Godzilla versus Kong or X, however you want to say the films. I don't think they've ever properly said how you say the Godzilla X Kong films, if it's versus, if it's whatever. But he brought Godzilla in a different way that was a harken back to the originals, but also made it a little more dramatic and heartfelt and everything else too. I'd love to see his take on something Star Wars. And like Dave said, he wants to give him like basically full creative control. I don't want to tell him what to do. I want him to be able to go in and do something, which would be fantastic. Give him a decent keep him on a small budget. He seems to excel with a small budget. Keep him with a smaller budget and let him go crazy and see what we kind of get out of it, because I think they would potentially be fantastic. We don't know what direction he could potentially take it in, which is also kind of exciting.
Yeah,
because you probably wouldn't be within the Skywalker saga or something else, or or who it would be about, if it would be about pilots or exactly what it would be. But it would be exciting to have him get a chance to do something, because he is a huge Star Wars fan as well. So I think if he has the opportunity to do it, he's going to do it.
Yeah, and I hope something comes together to where they can get on the same page and work to create something really cool, kind of something different outside of the normal stuff that we've seen from Star Wars. But like that would be a huge get as well, because he's a hot commodity for a reason, and just a brilliant creative mind, and let him run wild in that Star Wars universe. Let him see whatever cool things he would come up with.
So our next story goes back to everything is being made into a movie now. There's a Toys R Us feature film being made, and at first I was like, do we really need something based on Toys R Us? Because the stores don't exist anymore. There's some little pop-up shops. It's barely in existence anymore after everything closed. It was huge in our youth and everything, but when I started thinking about it more, it could be fun, because they said it could be like Night at the Museum and big, which kind of makes sense. But they threw in Back to the Future as well. So wait, is there going to be some sort of time travel element? But if they did do something Night in the Museum-esque, where all the toys and stuff within the store come to life, it could be a lot of fun, as long as they can differentiate enough from like not fully ripping off Night at the Museum. But if they did something where all the toys came to life, and you did get like have Hayden Christensen come back and voice Vader, and have people come back and voice their characters as toys, could be a lot of fun. But I'm trying to figure out like what else past doing something like that could be an interesting story to do about Toys R Us, unless you're making it about the downfall of their society. But it doesn't sound like it. Not downfall of society, downfall of their company and their stores. But it sounds like it's not going in that direction.
I still don't know what to make of this, honestly, because like your creative mind kind of starts to take over when you hear about something like that, and you're like, oh, I wonder if they could do something, if they want to make it Night at the Museum-esque. You have to imagine it's like probably set in the 90s at some point, when Toys R Us was really at its peak, and just kind of taking all the different toys that were popular back then and bringing them alive. You get your Rock'em Sock'em robots, you get your different toys and stuff like that could come to life, that could be a lot of fun. But yeah, I just don't know what the whole premise of this would be. You get an announcement like that with no context behind it, you kind of don't know what to make of it. Like, okay, you want to make it like this, well, okay, well, what's the plot? What's the idea behind it? So there's still so much that we don't know, obviously, but it's definitely an interesting news story that came out, because, like you said, the stores don't exist anymore. Like, they went bankrupt, and outside of a couple a couple of ones that were brought back. I know there was one they tried to make next to a Macy's in New York, I believe, or something like that, and a couple pop-ups here and there. Like it's a non-chain store, but for us of advanced experience, we lived through that era. We remember the "I want to be a Toys R Us kid" jingles, and all those types of things that and a lot of us have really fond memories of trips to Toys R Us. It was a big deal when you went to Toys R Us, back when it was open. And I just don't know where they could go with it and what kind of story they could tell. If you say Back to the Future, it automatically makes me think that they're going back in time to Toys R Us to revisit somebody's glory days or something, and we'll see what kind of story comes out of it.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. And yeah, around here, we had Johnny's Toy Store, and of course, you had Toys R Us around the world. And we had big, gigantic toy stores to go to, even if you watch Home Alone 2, big, gigantic toy store there. You don't really have dedicated toy stores anymore. They're just not profitable for people. But I have a feeling it is, like you said, going to go back and maybe have Paul Rudd put on the Power Glove, and he puts in the Konami code and brings everything to the store in life, and he's got to figure out how to bring everything back. And it could be fun if they get it right, but it's odd when you're saying you're making a film about a bankrupt business, but you're not doing a movie about the business. It's about something like set within Toys R Us. But hey, it could end up being a lot of fun.
It's definitely one to keep an eye on for sure. I want to move us now into our last story of the week, and this one is based on an incredibly popular video game right now. It's called Split Fiction, if you're not aware of it. An extremely popular game right now from the creators of It Takes Two, which is another really popular co-op video game that a lot of people got a lot of enjoyment out of. The new game here, Split Fiction, has gotten rave reviews. It's one of the highest rated, critically rated video games in a long time. It's getting perfect scores from just about everybody who rates it. I haven't played it yet. I've been wanting to dive in and play it so bad, but it looks like with its popularity, we're getting a feature film made out of it, and we've got some pretty good people attached to it. So you've got Sydney Sweeney, who is on board to star in the film, and it's also got a pretty dynamite director here in John Chu, who's famously recently worked on Wicked and will be in the upcoming, Wicked sequel as well. And getting him to direct this film, it's got me excited for what the possibilities could be for this, because if you know anything about those games, there's a lot of fun stuff that they can incorporate to make a good movie out of this.
Yeah, those games have become that studio has become very popular because of what they've done, because it's a unique experience. They're all co-op. Only one person has to own the game. Their friend, whoever they're playing with, can just get an access token to play it along with their friends. But it's all co-op, but it also pays tribute to different games and films and TV shows and other stuff with what it does. But it also, like with It Takes Two, you had some Street Fighter game moments, but it just mixed so many different mechanics and stuff together that made it really unique, from the puzzles it did to the fighting and gameplay. You were feeling like you were playing through so many different genres of games, but also telling a decent story. It Takes Two, at the heart of it, is about parents who are about to divorce and trying to see if they can mend things together through how they're transported down into their kids' play area and stuff. And Split Fiction does have a unique story to it, where I think it was at VR, where they're testing a game, but two of them end up getting sucked in together, and they're going through, I think there's Tron and so many other different inspirations for it, that it could make for a really great film. But I mean, this is really fast track. That game came out in March, and it's April now, and they're already got a director and a star for the movie.
Yeah, it's got potential to have a lot of fun, because the one limitation they may have are some IP sensitive stuff that maybe they can get some licenses for in the game, but maybe a little harder to do film wise, because how these studios like to hold on to their intellectual property heavy. And I think that's some of the struggles that Ready Player One had. And that's kind of the feel that you're getting from this, is a Ready Player One vibe from it. But, confidence wise in the director alone, John M. Chu, obviously Wicked, Crazy Rich Asians is another film, just a brilliant director, and getting his creative vision on board with this has got me excited for the possibilities of what this movie could be. And then obviously Sydney Sweeney's one of the most popular actresses in Hollywood right now, so getting a big star like that attached to your project is a recipe to have some kind of commercial success for it. But I'm excited to see what they come up with. That's one that has the potential to be a lot of fun.
And I'm curious who they pair beside her because it is two main female characters that you have there. So it's going to be interesting to see who they can get to pair off of Sydney Sweeney really well. But
Sure.
it looks like it'd be a lot of fun. If it's anything like the games, it's going to be a blast to watch because they can go silly, they can go over the top, it can be action packed, they can mix in so many different genres of action and games and sci-fi and books and movies and TV. There's so much they can mix into this, even if they don't. Of course, they're not going to do a one-to-one of the game, as no one really does, as we'll talk about in the film review we're about to speak about. But it's going to be real interesting to see what they can do with this property.
Yeah, I'm excited for whatever they come up with. You got a good base for a really good story and a really well-done visual film that I think can have the potential to be really, really good if it gets the proper care that it deserves.
So speaking of video game adaptations, our film review of the week is the adaptation of Until Dawn, which is a popular game series that was exclusive to PlayStation, also out on PC and everything. But this is a very loose adaptation of the story. It doesn't really follow the main line of the stories, but you get a lot of Easter eggs and everything else that leads you into the story. But because in the game, you have a group of friends who go out into the mountains, into a cabin to have a weekend, but there's bullying that happens of one of the girls, and her and her sister run off, and they end up passing away. In the film, we're already starting with someone being missing. So it's Clover's sister goes missing, and they're kind of going on a tour of everywhere where she last was. Their mom died, and she decided to split town, but they haven't seen or heard from her, so they head out, and they end up finding their way to her last known location, which ends up being this town that they probably shouldn't have never went to, and everything just goes haywire. And yeah, instead of this cabin out in the woods, you're getting a welcome center in the middle of town. But David F. Sandberg did this film. It's kind of a mix of so many different horror genres and stuff, because you get a look at, and we're going to do a little light spoilers, there's a little glimpse of them. It's like a big giant monster alien creature, and you get slasher elements. You also get like Groundhog Day meets Cabin in the Woods, because once they make it into this welcome center, they have to survive until dawn. But every single night is different. So if they die, they basically respawn. Although in the game, they didn't. You weren't allowed to respawn. So it was kind of a interesting addition that they did, because that was a game that was notorious. When you died, or these characters died, they were dead. But in the film adaptation, every night it repeated until they were able to survive until dawn, and every single night was different. So they were attacked in different ways, and horror was done in different ways, because, like I said, it's touched on so many different genres. And I was really mixed on how I felt. Like, if as an adaptation, I think it was a pretty decent failure as of adapting the game. It had a lot of the elements, but it was kind of nothing like the game. It was, if it didn't have the game's name or anything to it, it might have been a little bit better, just because it didn't match up with the game all that much. If you just went into it to look horror, if you love jump scares, because it is heavy on jump scares, and you love your gore, you might get some decent enjoyment out of this.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think in the end, it's a solid horror film. But if you're looking for as close to a faithful adaptation to the game, you're not going to find it as much in this one. But I will push back just a tad because of how the film ends.
Yeah.
That I think maybe could rectify some of that. And we'll get to that when we get to the end of the film. So there'll be a little bit of light spoilers on where the film leaves off. That, spoiler, if it's done well, there's probably going to be a second film like tied up that I think is going to push more of the game. But, you know, for this as a standalone movie, I think they do horror really well in this. Like, they call it Until Dawn in name only, but it's in the sense that that's kind of the end goal of the people involved in it, is to make it through the night and survive the night. And, you know, a lot of this is based on, and what they do, I think, a fairly good job of incorporating from the game into the movie is the psychological aspect of it, especially when you get to that exposition of, you know, this character that she meets at the gas station, who, if you've played the game, you know who he actually is and what he represents. And they do this, like, I think they do a fair enough job of going into the psychological aspect of some of that, like facing your fears and, you know, what drives people to react the way they do kind of thing. And I think they do a fine job of kind of coming full circle on that by the end. But if you're looking for a solid horror film, it's got good jump scares. It's got a lot of good elements to it. Like, I had fun watching the movie. Like, I think it was a solid horror film. If you're going to expect a faithful film adaptation of the game, you're going to be disappointed in that. But I think on its own two legs, the movie was fine. Like, it was a solid film. I had no issues with the content of the story or anything like that.
As I said, trying to judge it, it's an adaptation, but it's not really an adaptation. It's just basically using the name and a minor few elements to it. And that's where I'm kind of mixed on how I felt about it in the end, because if you took away that and it was its own thing, then it's a solid little fun horror film that you could do. But if you're viewing it as an adaptation of the game, it does have some failures with that, because the Groundhog Day element is not a part of the games. It's something they use, strictly for the film here. It uses a lot of horror tropes, so it's going over the standard dumb teen doesn't know what they're doing. Like, oh, hey, we're in a welcome center, the power goes out, we need to find a phone. Oh, let's go down in the dark basement. Yeah. Oh, I hear a noise, let me walk away by myself and figure out what that noise was. Yeah. It does use a ton of, it doesn't mean can't be fun, entertaining, but it uses basically every horror trope. And I even felt like there was some like Resident Evil kind of references, because there was that red typewriter in the basement as well, and even felt some Silent Hill. So it just felt like this amalgamation of so many different
a bunch of Sony
games
stuff.
And lots of Sony stuff. So that's where I was kind of mixed, because I did go in, I reviewed the story of the game and everything before I went in to see exactly how closely it was to it. And especially like the Wendigos, that was a big part of the game, and they're in here, but they're vastly different, because there was an emotional side to the Wendigos of how they were, chosen and how they became that, and the spiritualness of how they're possessed people that have been turned into these creatures. They do that in a different way in here, which it kind of works for their story they're doing. But again, if you're comparing it to the game, it loses a lot of that emotional impact. Like I said, the jump scares, they turn the volume up to like 15. They want to make sure they're getting those jump. A couple of them did get me, but it relies heavily on jump scares through it all. So if you're not a jump scare type of horror person, there probably not going to be a whole lot that you may like out of this, because that is kind of its main bit of horror. Like I said, you get slasher aspects of it. You get monster creature, kind of zombie meets monster type of creatures with the Wendigos. They're kind of, a little bit of this possession stuff, but not too much. But you do get some of the story of the game. It talks about the miners. It talks about a few things there. You get some Easter eggs towards the end of some of the game characters and stuff. But like I said, it can be a fun little horror movie on its own, but as an adaptation, it is kind of a failure.
Yeah, I mean, it's a loose thing if you're expecting it, but I think what they're trying to do is do a little bit more of a world building. This almost feels like a prequel to the game itself, like telling a narrative of a prequel prior to the game. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, because we're not really talking about the plot of the film a ton, but by the end of the film, you get, some resolution for the people involved in, getting, like, working together to survive and get out and make their way on. But in the end, you're left with this lingering shot of, these cameras in Dr. Hill's office of these things that he's seeing. And it flashes to the cabin from the game, and it flashes to some of the things that you're used to seeing from the game if you faithfully played it. And I think what's going to happen is this is kind of a setup to set the stage for a second film that is a little bit more game heavy,
potentially,
that I think, and I think a lot of that could come from how they've marketed the film, because it doesn't really market itself as like a direct adaptation of it. It's kind of a loosely based adaptation with elements from the game that they bring into the story. I have a feeling if they make a second film, it is going to be more of the Until Dawn heavy story, where you see the allusions of the characters in the first film to the characters from the game that could be potentially showing up in the second movie. And for that, I wish they'd have done it in reverse. I wish the first movie would have been more of the game, and then the second one could have been a prequel to jump back to the early portions of it, where you get some of the intros to some of these characters and elements that you already knew because you had played the game and you'd seen the first film. And then this one was could have been like the second film that was a jump back, and it kind of felt a little bit jumbled and out of order in how they could have presented it. But I think that's where they're going if they make a second film.
Because the lore and the world building that is closer to the game world it's touched on, and we get a little bit closer to it by the end, but there isn't a whole lot of answers of exactly what's going on in this. It's clearly setting up to do more because you don't know, without giving spoilers around, you don't know why all of this is happening. Still, like, you know that experiments, if you've played the game, you know it's all about experiments have been done on people. But this goes even kind of fuller out there when you have, like, this town is surrounded by a monsoon of rain that once you get through, you're kind of stuck in there. And there's supernatural elements, but the supernatural elements are never really gone into that much. They're just kind of, again, this is such a, you've got some Until Dawn, you've got a little Resident Evil, you've got zombie monster horror, you have the psychological horror a little bit, you got slasher horror, you even got, you know, like I said, throwing Groundhog Day and Cabin in the Woods, a little Evil Dead almost as well, especially with them bursting out of the ground with their hands and stuff. Like, it's trying to feel like it's paying respect to so many different horror films and genres and games that it gets a little lost in exactly what it's trying to do. Because we haven't talked a whole lot about the story, but the story isn't overly that deep without going into the lore and the aspects that could spoil a little bit of the story, because the majority of the film is they go into the Welcome Center, it hits nighttime, the hourglass flips over, and they have to survive. And it takes them a few times of dying to figure out exactly what's going on and how they're processing it. But then there's also a part in the movie where it just jumps, and probably some of the scarier elements were what was watched on his phone, because there was a character in there, which is Abel, who records a lot of their stuff. And so it jumps ahead to where you don't know how many, they're counting days of how many times they've gone through that. There's a guest book with their names are written in it, and you can see how many times people have done it, and there's a certain number of times that no one's gone past. But when they get to showing the videos, there's a lot of creepy stuff, and that was presented really cool and neat how they did that. It reminds me of was a Resident Evil 7 where it was the VHS tapes and everything else. It kind of gave me a flashback to that, and there was some really creepy stuff in there. But I think that was the scariest stuff in the movie, was that few bits of the recorded footage from the phone. So it was just, to me, it was such an odd mix of a lot of different things. It was still fun if I just turned my brain off to enjoy it as just over the top jump scare gore horror. I could have a good time with it, but my mind wants to compare it to the game, and that's where I have the trouble with it.
Yeah, and I think that's where some people are going to kind of lose the plot a little bit. But I mean, at the end of the day, this is about girl's sister has gone missing. They're going to find her, and they find themselves trapped in this supernatural void of, you know, this welcome center where they get experimented on, and their job is to find the creative way to survive the night. And they present it with this element of one of you has to die so the others can live, and their whole thing is, well, we don't accept that. We're going to find a creative way so we can all make it out. And then that's kind of the plot of the film, and you just go on that adventure and you kind of see them work their way through it to see if they can all make it out alive. And that's kind of the whole plot. It's a little bit of a thin plot that throws a lot of stuff, like, especially if you're going in having never played the game and don't understand it. I think you could lose a little bit of that too, but you know, I think they do a fine job in the third act of the film of giving you a little bit more of that exposition as to why it's happening, why, you know, the one person was picked because of, you know, things that she's gone through in her life, and, you know, the mental health struggles that she's had, why she was chosen to kind of be a part of this experiment. And, you know, her friends just happen to be innocent bystanders to the you know, the things that are happening. Like, they were necessary elements to get her to kind of confront these things that she had needed to. And that was kind of some cool exposition towards the end, but you get a lot of the horror elements playing out through the first two acts of the movie by the time you get to the third and final act, where it really, really ramps up and takes off, and a lot of stuff starts happening that, you know, you get the cool horror story, and then you get like the action horror towards the end. And it's a fun journey that it takes you on. But if you're going in expecting a faithful adaptation of the game, you're gonna you're going to feel a type of way about it if those are your expectations. And I think they could have done a little bit of a better job in marketing the story and what they were trying to tell ahead of time. And we found that in some films that we've seen lately where you think it's going in. I think a good example of that's The Monkey that we went and saw, where we were expecting one type of horror movie and got something completely different. Mm-hmm. But a lot of that has to do with how it's marketed. And I think marketing-wise, they could have set people's expectations a little bit differently, and it could have expected the way you experienced and how you felt about it at the end.
Yes, I don't know. It was just such a huge mashup of stuff. Like I said, it works if you just turn your brain off and you're not looking at it as an adaptation. You're just looking at, oh, this is a new horror movie that's very similar in the vein of Cabin in the Woods meets Groundhog Day is the best that I can explain how this film is kind of like that. But it tries to be so many other different genres and different things. It does lose a little bit of its own identity, which, as you said, it feels like this is one movie that was kind of a setup for another film more than anything. And we don't know if it's going to get the box office return to be able to do more. And I believe Until Dawn's it's gotten remastered, but it's only been one game as well. So exactly what they've decided to do, if they're planning it as a new trilogy or multiple films or something, like I had fun with it, but I was also a little bored towards the end. Like it didn't keep me as gripped and grasped in it, because a lot of my brain was like, well, that's nothing like the game. This isn't anything like the game. Because the game did have a lot of psychological elements, spiritual elements, and emotional elements to it. And the emotional, there's relationships and there's exes and other stuff going on. I didn't really care about the relationships between the characters. You got two dating, two that used to date. That did play a big part in the game, because you had, there was bullying that happened to one of the girls because she was in love with one of the friends, but they played a prank on her, and that's what caused her untimely death and set up a lot of other stuff. But, there was swapping of who was dating who, and there was a lot of relationship drama and emotion and stuff. And in the end, I don't think you really cared that much about these characters. You cared a little bit more about Clover than anybody else, and that's kind of what it kind of set up. The others felt very expendable if they were going to die. But I will give it props for the practical effects, because there's explosions, there's being stabbed and ripped in half, and a whole lot of different, very gory, crazy, over-the-top kills that happen in it. And the practical effects for it look great. Really solid, I think it really looks solid. Like some of them did catch you by surprise when it happened. It's like, oh, okay. And then it just, especially the exploding stuff, and it just went like, all right, you like that? Here's this. And it just felt like, I know you're all going to enjoy this, so I'm just going to do it in ridiculous, crazy ways after this now, because that whole sequence was kind of wild and out there. Sure. Like, it was almost a comedic bit in the middle of the movie when they did that.
Yeah, I think just listening to how you've reacted to this, I think you were so strong in your expectations for this that I think you were let down a little bit by it, because it wasn't what you were expecting based on what you thought was going to be a more faithful adaptation of the game. I could tell 5 minutes into this movie it wasn't going to be a faithful adaptation of the game. I was kind of able to disconnect my what I know about the game from coming in there, and it felt more of you get exposed to some things throughout that are from the game. You're like, okay, I see the incorporation here, but I think I was able to kind of detach myself from that expectation fairly early on in the movie, when it was very clear that it wasn't going to be what the first game was. And then I felt a little better about it by the time you got to the end. We're like, okay, I see where they're going. Like, if they make a second film, that's probably going to be more of the narrative from the game adapted into the film. And, and I can see why that could bog down your experience with the film and your enjoyment of it a little bit. And I found myself able to kind of really detach from that super early on when I saw that it wasn't going to be what that was like. It's kind of more in name, and they're going to incorporate some stuff, and I wound up being right about it. And I felt a little better about the film after that going in, that I was like, yeah, this is very clearly not the game, but there's elements from the game. You get the doctor in the game. You get the Wendigo elements of it. You get some of that stuff. You get the violence and the horror. And there's like certain type of horror elements from the game that get adapted into this film. Like, a lot of the things you're describing are elements of the game itself, because you get jump scares in the game. You get the psychological elements of the game. You get some supernatural stuff in the game as well. And you get kind of a little bit of all of those things incorporated in this movie, which is why I think they did a fine enough job. I just think maybe the expectation of it being a faithful adaptation of the game, the narrative from the game, is what could throw a lot of people off. And it sounds like that's the experience that you had with it too. Because I've found personally, when I was able to kind of detach that from myself, I was just able to go along and enjoy the ride and see what they did. And I enjoyed the movie. Like I said, it's a very thin plot. It's girl goes missing, girl's friends go to find her, they get trapped in the house, and now they got to survive. Like, it's a very thin plot for the most part. And like I said, it's kind of a slow development over time that you see that there's a little bit more sinister forces at play here, and there's a point to all of this. And I think they could have done a little better job of explaining that throughout the movie, but it kind of felt more like the journey these characters were going along to discover what they needed to find within themselves to make it through the night. And I think they could have done a little bit a better job of explaining that in the movie, but overall I had a good time watching it.
Here's one where I said that if they called it by any other name and wasn't calling it an adaptation of the game, that it would have been probably felt a whole lot better to me, because we are looking in that realm of, we have some really good video game adaptations going on. We got the Last of Us show, which people are still mixed up, but I think they did a solid job of the changes and stuff they did in there, but still feeling like the show. Of course, Sonic the Hedgehog, all three of those movies, but that's not a game series that really has a deep story and lore. I mean, there's been animated shows and everything that's been done of it to give you a world building and stuff, but this felt a lot like the Mila Jovovich's Resident Evils. Like, it's Resident Evil kind of in name, and it incorporates elements, but it does a pretty far departure from kind of what it's adapting, and that people are very mixed on those. Some absolutely love them and have a lot of fun. If Resident Evil movies are ones that also, if they just called it something else, it probably would have been a whole lot more well received than being Resident Evil. And kind of the same with this. Like, I was a fan of the game. I wasn't a huge fan. I didn't have a whole lot of expectations going in, but when you're calling something an adaptation, you're expecting to see a little bit more of the game adapted, other than it feels like they were adapting so many different genres and so many different types of horror, mixing it in there. It just kind of felt a little bit messy to me, and that's kind of where it took me out of it, just some, because I enjoyed the horror elements of it. Like I said, it probably does one too many jump scares, because that's where it goes by that, but I enjoyed it, but like I said, it is a failure as an adaptation. So you've got to kind of look at it as not an adaptation. You've got to look at it as it's kind of a new, different thing than Until Dawn. So yeah, if you're a fan of the Until Dawn game, you may not enjoy this too much unless you're able to really just disconnect yourself like you were to take it as something different, because it does loosely use Until Dawn as the basis. Like, I don't know if they just wanted the name because they wanted, well, you got to survive Until Dawn. Like, that's the main premise they went off of when it came to the game story. I was just looking for more of that emotional connection, because we did just get Sinners, which was a horror film, very different horror film. But that one's giving you the more emotional, and it's giving you this beautiful cinematography and everything. It wasn't a badly shot film, but to have Until Dawn follow up a different type of horror film like Sinners was, to go into something that basically gave you every type of horror film, was just a little bit like, okay, it's giving us every type of horror that we could probably look at. You got body horror, you've got slasher, you've got explosions, you've got everything in it. Like, if you love basically every type of horror, you could find something out of this. But I think it just tried to do too much of everything else and not enough of the game.
See, I think this might be one of the first films that I think you and I are a little bit more disconnected in how we how we enjoyed it and perceived it, because I think a lot of the stuff you're talking about are direct elements of the game itself. Like, the game itself does loose, I think personally you may be missing a little bit of it, just because you were holding on to the idea that it was going to be so much more narrative driven like the game was. And that's not necessarily the case in this movie, which is fine.
Because the game is heavy about your choice as a player and what you get to do throughout that.
And I understand that. And I can see where, like, a lot of fans, hardcore fans of the game, would find that disconnect to be concerning. I still think on its own merit it's fine, and I don't think it's a fair comparison to make to Sinners, just because we just
I'm just saying, like, we got something so fantastic like that, and this felt like
These are two completely different
B level
two
horror.
completely different elements. It's like going and saying we just watched, Avengers Infinity War and we're following up with Madam Web. I don't necessarily think it's Madam Web levels of
I wasn't
bad,
trying
like,
to compare the two films, but it's
not
like
a,
we got horror done in such a
yeah.
unique, different way, and then this one we got everything in the kitchen sink.
It's coming at it from a different angle. Yeah. I understand that, and I get that. But I think we're viewing it through two different lenses here, which is fine. I like that. I like having that dialogue and that conversation because I find myself being able to a little bit more like identify and disassociate when I'm watching a film like that. Sometimes I just kind of be like, all right, I'm going to not think about the game while I'm watching this and just enjoy the story that it takes me on. And I found that to be fairly easy fairly early, and knowing that it wasn't like, oh, this is definitely not the game. Like I love the game, and just knew right away that it was like, okay, it's not the narrative that they're telling from that, because it's not how the movie starts is definitely not how the game started.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just two completely different stories, and I'm like, okay, this is going to be a lot looser than maybe I thought. And, for that reason, I was able to just kind of just go on the journey that they were taking us. And they do incorporate elements of the game into the movie. That it's all there. It's just not done in a way. This was going to be hard to adapt into a film anyway, because there's so much player-driven things that you can do with the story of the game that you don't have the option of doing in the film. Obviously, you can have people make certain decisions in the game that affects the way the narrative is told in that game. What's really fun about the game is you could play that game 5 different times, and it goes 5 different ways.
Endings.
Yeah, like it goes 5 different ways. I think by the end, you get to kind of a similar place with the ending. The ending's fairly similar depending on the choices you make throughout the game. You get to a certain point, but that's the fun part of it, and that's why it's so hard to adapt into a movie. But I think they did fine with the elements of the game that they incorporated into it. It's just knowing that it wasn't going to be that narrative that they were telling. Like I was okay with that. I think they did a fine job with the story they presented, while loosely incorporating several of the elements of the game into the movie as well. And it wasn't so narrative driven like the original game was. But I do think if they go with a second film, it's going to probably lean more into that. So I'm a little more forgiving of it in that respect. But yeah, it's interesting to see your take on this for sure, because I really feel this is the first time. I feel like when we get to our rating here in a second, like we're going to be further apart on this rating than I think we've been for any other movie we reviewed.
Which is fine.
And I love that. I love that. I love that we're on different pages on this, because it feels like you and I are so in lockstep, because for a lot of films, we are on the same page with the way we see things. And I think for this one, it's fun to kind of talk about the disconnect that you and I have had.
Yeah, so getting to that rating, to me, Until Dawn was a light adaptation of the game. It did a lot of its own stuff. It does go heavy on the jump scares and the gore, which it can be fun if you can disconnect from it. I wasn't really able to disconnect from it being the adaptation. It uses a lot of the tropes. It tries to mix in so many different types of horror films and genres, along with Groundhog Day and everything else. So in the end, I'm probably going to give this like a 4.5 to a 5. Like it was very middle of the road for me. Like it could be fun if you just go in to get the horror aspects of it, but if you're looking at a story to a game that was kind of deep on lore and story, it doesn't really give you all that. It briefly touches on it, but it goes in its own way that it kind of loses its own identity because it's trying to be so many different things at once.
Yeah, and I viewed it from a completely different lens than I was able to disassociate from the fact that it wasn't the narrative from the game, and they do a fine job of incorporating some elements of the game into it. And the practical effects were done very well. I think the narrative was fine if you take away the fact that it's not the game itself, but it's loosely based on it. I'm giving it a 6.5 personally, because I got a lot of enjoyment from the film. The acting's fine, the dialogue's decent, but it's not great. It's not going to like elevate it higher. I think the horror elements were done well. If you're a fan of jump scares, I like a good jump scare. They do that in abundance here. You get a lot of that from the game. So there are elements of the game that they do incorporate well. My biggest disappointment in the film is I feel like it's more of a setup to a second movie than the other way around. I really feel like they could have benefited more from giving you the narrative of the game as close as they could in the first film, and this film could have been the sequel that was a jump back to earlier elements of, the Until Dawn story, where you can get some callbacks to, or some allusions to characters that we knew we were going to see from the game in the second film. And if they'd have done that one first and this one second, I think people would probably be a little more receptive to it. But I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed the the journey that it took us on. I'm giving it a solid 6.5 for me. Not the best horror film I've seen. It's not the best horror film I've seen in the last couple of weeks by a mile. But I got a lot of enjoyment out of this, and I think if you're a fan of horror and different elements of horror being incorporated into a film, I think you'll get some enjoyment out of it. Is it a perfect movie? Absolutely not. Is it going to be my favorite movie of the year or on my list of favorite movies of the year? Definitely not. But I enjoyed the film for what it was.
Yeah, and I can respect that. Like I said, I didn't connect as much to it. I felt like there's too many tropes that they were just repeating stuff that we've seen 100 times. I think it had fun aspects to it, but it just, like I said earlier in the review, it just kind of left me a little bored. But Until Dawn is in theaters now. If you go check it out, come to our Discord, come to our socials, come talk to us about it, because we do both feel, as you can see between our feelings on it, that there's going to be a lot of different opinions on that, depending on if you are hardcore into the game, if you're not, if you're hardcore into horror. There's going to be a lot of different opinions on that, which a lot of horror is. A lot of horror can be all over across the board on how people feel, and ones that you may love may be hated by most everybody else. So everyone's going to get something different out of this film, which I guess in the end makes it closer to the game, because everyone had a different experience playing the game from each other, because every decision was based on what you, the player, made and how you felt, and there could be hundreds of different endings. So there was different endings to how we felt about this film. Yeah,
I love it. I love having the dialogue about it. Come to our social medias and tell us whose rating you think you side with the most. Do you think you viewed it similar to me and you're right, or similar to Brad and you're wrong? But let's go and let's talk about it. I'm totally kidding. But no, like, I love having this dialogue because, like I said, it's so fun when we're on different sides of something, as opposed to when we see things very similarly. And I think you and I fall into that. We're so similar in, like, our senses of humor and our personalities that I think we see a lot of films the same way. So I get a lot of excitement when we think about things differently like this, and I think it creates a really fun conversation. And I was happy that we were able to kind of have this back and forth about it for sure. So yeah, now let's take us into our TV review of the week. We have the returning Andor Season 2. I'm so excited that the show is back. Season 1 was absolutely fantastic on Disney+. You're getting now 3 episodes a week for the next 4 weeks to kind of tell this story of, the beginning of this rebel alliance and this rebellion against the Empire kind of taking shape, taking form, and eventually it's going to lead up into the events of a Rogue One, a Star Wars story that, is very polarizing for a lot of fans. A lot of fans think that movie is absolutely brilliant. There's a lot of fans that just despise that movie for whatever reason. I'll never understand it, but, it's Star Wars. Nobody hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans, as we love to say. But this show now picks up with, a little bit of a time jump here. You get Cassian is now kind of like a leader in this rebel alliance. He's kind of rolling into this character that we know that he is from Rogue One, like this leader in the rebel alliance. And you get him starting out here in episode 1, getting ready to steal a TIE fighter basically from the Empire to kind of help out with the rebellion. And it really jumps off there. He's trying to get back to, Bix and some of his, friends that we see from season 1 here. And it really starts to take off there because you get this really fun sequence of, you think he's going to have this awesome takeoff with this plane and he's just going to zoom out and steal it and everything's fine. And then he hits the old classic, think you're throwing it in drive, you throw it in reverse and backs it into the wall. It was a very jarring, funny element that you don't get a ton of in this type of show because it is so serious and dramatic that it was a fun little jarring comedy moment to kind of get me in the right mindset for the rest of this run of these first couple episodes. But it was just so funny how they started it.
It looked like a TIE Interceptor, but when I looked, I think they called it a TIE Avenger or something else. It all had different names. So it looked very similar to an Interceptor, but it wasn't. But yeah, you don't. It's a very kind of dark story overall. You've got the Empire just choking people out here, not knowing how they can survive, because we get 3 different stories that are happening that are all interconnected. But you've got Andor's journey, you have Mon Mothma, her daughter is getting married, but there's a lot of political undertones and back and forth conversations happening there. And then the third is with the Empire. They have their goals set on a certain planet to do some stuff with. And that was kind of more of the strange elements. Like, I love the first 3 episodes, but when you think about it, like every 3 episodes, we're moving on after this. We're moving a year or more. I think it's a year after every 3 episodes. So whatever happened in these first 3 episodes, it matters to what's going forward, but we're kind of leaving it behind. And it was really interesting by watching the first one. It felt a little slow with setting it up. But by the time they got to the second and the third one really had a big payoff for everything, and also had one of the probably the craziest scenes that has been in Star Wars, is dealing with a dark subject that it's kind of been alluded to and around in Star Wars a little bit, if you want to look at, and we'll talk about it later, but it was dark. It was a dark point for Star Wars.
Yeah, I want to preface this by saying, like, the subject is a little triggering for people, so just to give kind of a warning on what's coming, but a very serious element, and I'm wondering the necessity of it within the story, and was it really needed? And you can make the argument about that, but you get, like you said, you have these interconnected stories that kind of play out over these first 3 episodes that I think are setting up some really interesting stuff in the long run here, because you've got, Cassian, like we said, trying to get back to, Bix and Brasso and his friends on this planet, and he makes his way to this planet and, thinking he's meeting up with, someone specific, but he ends up getting jumped by, this group of bandits that are kind of holding him hostage in, like, the most absurd, like, poorly organized group.
I feel like Robin Hood Men in Tights type of group.
It was very jarring with, the serious element in so much of this show, that you get a little bit more comedic relief from this, because they're so not well organized. They're not the smartest, group of people to kind of take him, and you feel like Cassian gets bested by these guys. There's no way this is going to last, but you get that playing out for a couple episodes here, where they kind of capture, Cassian here, because he's outgunned 15-20 to 1 here.
He's also dressed full Empire gear because he was stealing. He was infiltrating there,
and he's trying to convince them that he's not this pilot
that
rebel. Can help him. Like, I've been, they get to the point where he's like, he realizes who they are, what their group was. He was like, "We've been helping you. Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you holding me here?" And, like, these guys just don't believe any of it and have their own infighting and inner rebellion that they're dealing with. And it was just so absurd. But yeah, you get some really fun elements for this group that was just it was needed to kind of cut through a lot of the seriousness of a lot of the other stuff that was going on, that I didn't think I would enjoy it, but after watching it, I think I appreciate that kickoff to this season for where Cassian was and where he was trying to get to. That really helped kind of cut through some of the real serious stuff that's going on here.
Yeah, because he's basically with this group through episode 3 until he finally, finds that way out or away from him, because they basically split off. Like, there's some that want to do differently with Cassian, while others want to do something else with him, so they end up fighting and shooting at each other. So, one group stays with the TIE fighter, the rest of them go into, I think it's his ship that he had left there that he was coming back to, and they're running out of food, and they've got potential other creatures and other things going around, which it did add a different element. It was very strange compared to the rest of it, because when we go to the Mon Mothma story, it's, as we saw, that basically an arranged marriage has happened between her daughter and I believe was it Tay's son that they were going to, but we get here and everybody's showing up. Luthen's showing up, and he wasn't invited. Mon Mothma's like this, but you even see a little separation and a little darkness between her and her husband, because he makes a dark joke about, like, Tay being her boyfriend and her lover and stuff. And there's definitely some rockiness going between their marriage and everything else there. But I have to give a ton of props over to Genevieve, who was Mon Mothma. I think she was absolutely fantastic through these first 3, especially when you get to the final episode, the 3rd episode here, of where she's, talking to her daughter about stuff and how it was for her and her mom, and how she's trying to be all this and pouring her heart out, and her daughter gives her such a harsh, sharp response, and then she kind of spirals from there, and we get the dancing and the drinking and everything. I think she did such a fantastic job in these first 3 episodes, because you can see in her face and her eyes through all 3 episodes that there's so much that she's trying to process and go through, not only with the wedding, but everybody's coming to her with a different aspect. And, Tay comes to her about, well, I did a lot of risk and stuff. Where's my reward? And she's like, oh, what do I do now? Because she got help. They had financial debt and they had other things, while they're also trying to help the rebellion and all that. And you just see so much play out on her face and her emotions. That was just so fantastic through these first 3.
Yeah, she was really good in a real bright spot here, and she finds herself in this real conundrum. And it wasn't Tay's son that they were married; it was the other gentleman. I forget his name too, but he's kind of a wealthy, prominent.
There's figure. A lot of people in those scenes.
Yeah, and it was his son, but Tay's the one that they're trying to convince to stay quiet about their help with the rebellion, and they're trying to kind of buy him off. What's the number going to be to keep him to guarantee his silence? And that kind of plays out in a kind of a heartbreaking way for, Mon Mothma here by the end of episode 3, where, Luthen's really pushing to get an answer. Like, hey, what's this number you're landing on? And she's like, I'll get it. I got it. I know the number. He's going to come through for us. Like, he'll be fine. And then you get the realization by the end of the 3rd episode that he, he's not convincing enough of the fact that he's going to remain son. So it kind of forces their hand, where you see, him eventually being quote unquote taken care of, and we don't really get like a resolution for it, but you get kind
something
of
was going to happen there that didn't happen.
Like he mysteriously, the person he was expecting to be his driver wasn't there, and it was someone else, and they look back and you can kind of see that it's something a little more sinister at work. And I'm wondering if they're going to pay that off, because like you said, we get to these time jumps and you don't know where they're going with the next set of episodes and how things play out. But, you go through, you get the, the customs, and I think they do a really good job of like world building and understanding of like cultures in these couple episodes.
There's a lot of like spiritualness, and there's rituals when it comes to this wedding ceremonies for dances, and what the parents and everyone involved are circling the group. And it was really interesting to see that this is clearly a different type of like religion and everything else that they have going on. That was really kind of unique to it.
Yeah, something we haven't really explored a ton of in Star Wars very much, other than the fact that knowing that the Jedi are kind of like a religious type, group of people. But it was really cool to see kind of that culture explored here a little bit, and the traditional stuff. And I know when you walked in, I yelled "Tima," it's one of the things that they shout as part of their rituals. But it was cool to see that element explored, and this whole business with Mon trying to walk the line of being high up in the Senate and a well-prominent figure here, and also like low-key helping the rebellion on the side. Like, when is the jig going to be up for her? When is she going to be discovered? Because if you know who Mon Mothma is, if you've watched any of the Star Wars stuff, you know how important she is to a lot of things. So you kind of know what's happened to her eventually in the future, but you kind of see this early stage of the rebellion here, and you see her integral part in getting it off the ground. And it's really cool to see them explored from a different, angle of where we know she's going versus how she kind of gets started there. Luthen is such a fascinating character, and Stellan Skarsgård is just fantastic. He chews up almost any scene he's in. He's playing this real, like, shady, conniving, you don't know what side he's really on. Is he really on the side of good? Is he really not?
He says a lot of stuff that's like, well, I can do this, or I take this. Like, you don't really know what his intentions are with anyone or anything at this moment.
And it's so fascinating to see, because he kind of helps through the rebellion. He kind of helps with some of the Imperial stuff. You're like, it feels like you're just working for yourself, but he's towing that line in a way that I think eventually is going to have to be a push come to shove kind of moment, which you're going to have to show your cards and pick a side eventually, and we'll see where he winds up with that. But, a lot of this is about, Cassian trying to get, escape these captors so he can get back to, Bix and, the others who are on their own little story in this as well. They got, they're on this remote planet. They're doing their mechanics work to kind of hide from the being hunted after the, the events of, Phoenix at the end of season 1 there. And, they're wanted, and the Empire's looking for them, and they're on this remote planet trying to do this Well, it's not even necessarily a remote planet because you find out what planet it is, and it's a planet that's been used several times in Star Wars, whether it's been A New Hope or, in Clone Wars and Rebels especially, that, it's a planet that, is a farming planet. They're going and helping, and they're laying low, and they're trying to avoid it. Well, now the Empire is coming through their planet and doing inspections in these different areas and these different sections of the planet, and they're trying to avoid being caught. And there's a lot of real world politics stuff that comes into some of this stuff where you're like, are you here legally, are you not, are they caring, are they picking and choosing who they're going after? And some of that comes into play here, but you get Bix and Brasso, and I forget the other one's name. I think his name's Will, but they're
Wellmon, but I think they called him Will.
Call him Will. That they're on their own trying to, round up some rebellion help as well, while also waiting to hear from Cassian because he's supposed to make his way back for them. And it's a real interesting story that plays out on that planet that leaves us with a little bit of heartbreak by the time we get to the end of the 3rd episode. But they have quite an experience on this planet too.
Yeah, and this was the element that we talked about that could trigger some people, because we get the first initial visit by Kroll, who is a Empire lieutenant, and he comes up to talk to Bix, and he's being very creepy, asking these creepy lines about her husband, and she's out here alone, and all this other stuff, and you get a bad, creepy feeling about this guy, and then they leave, and then it's not until the crux of everything that he comes back, and they're there to do the immigration check and everything else, and he splits off again from everybody else to go to Bix, and that's where, he attempts to rape her. This is a stark contrast. Like, as I alluded to, like, there's some stuff like Jabba had slaves that were barely dressed and everything else that you could allude that some stuff was happening there, but this is a full-on kind of rape attack that's happening where she's defending herself, and you see her getting beaten and weakened and everything else, and you see the creepiness of it. Like, I think it was a heavy, well-acted, well-portrayed scene, but it's one that is very heavy. It's not a subject matter that's been that full force out and talked about, because she literally says it to them that he tried to rape her, that it was something very heavy that you weren't expecting in this episode. And as you alluded to, was it something we exactly needed? Like, I think it was well acted, but was it something we needed to have in here? Especially because we're going to have a 1-year time jump after that episode. Is that going to play into her mental or anything else going forward? Is there something else that's going to happen, or she's going to have some trauma from it? We don't know until we see the next 3 exactly how that's going to play out. But that is one of the darker elements that we've had in Star Wars in a very long time. You have death and everything else, but this is a very triggering, hard subject, heavy subject to go into.
Yeah, and we can kind of spoil a little bit of it there. The attack doesn't get finished. Like, he doesn't go through with the act. It's not that, but the allusion to it, the fear and the very real danger of it is presented in this story. Spoil a little bit of it. She kills the guy, and she has to explain to the guy who hears him yelling outside of the facility that they were in, that, he goes to, pull a blaster out on her. She's like, he tried to force himself on me. He tried to go after me. And, he's still, Imperial side, obviously. He's like, well, we can't have that. You attacked an Imperial officer kind of thing. But, it leads to them kind of forcing their way to break away. They're trying to escape. And there's this whole convoluted, is their friend helping them? Is he not helping them kind of thing? Like, it leads to them trying to make a break for it and escaping the planet without being caught. And they eventually, Brasso eventually gets rounded up by, some Imperial guards, some stormtroopers. You get some stormtroopers here finally, and he tries to make a break for it, and as he's making a break for it, you get the returning Cassian on his ship.
Some great action sequences.
Fantastically shot stuff where you see the little individual targeting of people and him, using the blaster from the thing to kind of help his friends. But as Brasso's making his break on his speeder, you don't see it until Cassian takes out all of the Imperial forces on the ground, that you see the crashed landing of the speeder, and he goes and finds his friend Brasso, who was a very prominent figure in season 1, doesn't make it to the end of episode 3, but he does finally get reunited with Bix and Will at that point, and the episode ends with them really just getting on Cassian's stolen ship and taking off, and them having to leave Brasso behind, and you see the very stoic nature of Bix with what just happened to her on top of losing her friend. Thankful that she's reunited with Cassian finally, but you do have that real element of what just happened with them and how much it's going to weigh on them with the time jump. Is there a strain in the relationship with Bix and Cassian at this point because of what happened? Which does tend to happen when those types of things happen. It's a very real traumatic thing that she's gone through. Two traumatic things, really, losing her, close friend Brasso here, and, the forced attack on her by the Imperial people. But we don't know what her mindset is going to be when we get to these next set of episodes. And with that time jump, we'll see where she's at mentally, emotionally, and what's going on with the world when they do make this time jump here in the next set of episodes. But it's a very hard way to end this first couple episodes. It was just such a well done story, man. I really enjoyed the adventure we went on for these 3 episodes.
Yeah, and the last kind of element to the story is the other Empire story with it. So we have Dedra, who's back, and her boyfriend, husband, I forget exactly if they have a title to it. That part was kind of the most strangest of it, because we were trying to see exactly where this is going, because, we're following her husband around doing his job and introducing, you've got her being pulled into her secret meeting with Krennic about they want this Gorman planet that has these spiders that can create the silk, and the Empire's going to take it by any means necessary. But she's been one in the first season, was kind of back and forth on, we still don't know, is she a good guy? Could she be into a good guy or a bad guy? Because she kind of disagrees with the Empire and what they're doing. She doesn't exactly agree with being part of this secret council, but her story more revolves around her relationship, because we get his mom showing up, and her kind of, which is a great delivered line, but his mom is so crazy over the top mom that just wants to guilt trip everybody, and she puts her in her place and stuff too. But it was kind of weird, that dynamic, because everything that's going on with the Gorman stuff, you don't exactly know what is the end game of this. How does this tie into the bigger story of Star Wars going into A New Hope and going into Rogue One and everything? What exactly is this part of the story really going to mean going forward?
And we don't know, and that's where it's going to be interesting to see how their story plays out too. But you've got some fun threads here that are really all being tied together really well. I'm excited to see where this time jump takes us and where we move forward, because you've got some real serious things in play. Where is the Rebel Alliance going to be a year from this point? You have everybody so scattered out that they really haven't been able to collectivize and come together too much. But you've got all these people off doing their own thing. When is Mon Mothma and Cassian going to finally interact? When are all of these people going to come together? Because you have by the end of this episode with Mon Mothma, you have Tay being taken away, and she's kind of coming to grips with that, and she's going through with still the ritualistic stuff from the wedding, and trying to drown her sorrows while dancing through the night to give the illusion that everything's okay when everything's really not, because she still has a role to play in this to get as much information as she can to help the Rebel Alliance. So she has to keep up face while very much dealing with the emotional toll of losing, potentially losing somebody like Tay, who she tried really hard to get on her side, but couldn't because of his own insecurities and his own obliviousness to certain things. And it was just, it was kind of fun to see his inability to see the bigger picture with a lot of things and how that's played out for him. And we'll see what fate he meets by the time we get to these next set of episodes. But these people are going to be in a very different place in this next grouping of episodes, but I'm here for it, man. I'm excited to see how they bridge that gap and where we wind up going in this adventure that they're taking on. I thought this was a great first 3 episodes so far, because it was a really good way to set up. You have a little bit of that levity that you need from a lot of the serious stuff that's going on. You get a little bit of the lightheartedness in this story with, Dedra and everything. That's a little, not so much comedic relief, but it feels like a very real world kind of story where you have, the guy with the overbearing mother and the the wife who is going to have his side and help put the mother in place to kind of check her to keep everything harmonious, and they're in both of their personal idiosyncrasies that they have in their personalities and how they mesh, and what makes both of them tick. It's a fun story that they're telling with them too, and I'm excited to see where she winds up in all of this, because you can kind of see elements of her going full good, but you can also see something crazy happening that pushes her very violently the other way. I'm kind of waiting to see how they play that out.
Just where do I purchase my floating DJ droid?
Right. Can I get one?
I want one.
Yeah.
You get some fun stuff like that. Like it's the contrast between the three stories was so different because, and Cassian's part started off kind of comedic with the ship and with the group of people that capture him. And then it becomes a little more serious when he's fighting in action and he's going to save Bix and them. And then, Mon Mothma, you can see she's trying to be someone in the Senate and a mom and a wife and a rebellion leader and all that. And she's being pulled in so many directions. You're getting more depth and emotion because she's kind of spiraling out of control a little bit. She's like, everything is kind of going wrong. She feels like her marriage is falling apart. Her daughter kind of almost looks like she resents her now and doesn't like that, and her allies with the rebellion are kind of doing stuff without her or threatening her or wanting something else. Like she's really losing control on a lot of aspects, and that's really going to be fun to me to see. How do we get from this Mon to the one that we know in A New Hope and stuff? And again, she was so fantastic. She was one of the highlights of these first three. She was so good. But then you get to that Empire, like you got that kind of weird that, we're showing how do you have a relationship within the Empire, but that that's got to pay off with something later on. We just don't know yet what that's setting up. And then we don't know exactly what Gormon's setting up. Like why is this material so important to the Empire? Because we don't know, is that how they make something like the AT-ATs or something in the future. We don't know exactly what they have planned, but they say they're going to take it with force, however they need to be, but only the people in that room can have any knowledge about it. So is it even something that's sanctioned by the Empire? Is it something Krennic is doing on his own? There's a bigger mystery with that side of it that we don't know. But I really enjoyed these first three episodes. It had a little strangeness with that Empire stories and stuff, but Andor has such great cinematography. It looks gorgeous. It looks great. I mean, the special effects, the costume design, just the colors and the feel of everything just looks incredible. It had some great action scenes. Like I really enjoyed what they did here. Like Andor season 1 was fantastic, and season 2 is looking like it's keeping that same. Like it is one of the best things that Star Wars has put out in a long time, not only visually but storytelling. Its story is paramount. Story is the heart and the soul of this, and it's leaving some mystery, but I was intrigued from the get-go that we were getting it broken up in 3-episode chunks, and we're having a time jump after one. Exactly how are they going to handle that? And I think episode 1 was very slow with going. It could have been a little bit quicker paced, but 2, but moreover 3 really helped solidify just how solid this first 3 episodes were.
Yeah, and you can tell they're really ramping up to a bigger, like a lot of stuff's going to have to come to a head because we know where we're going in this story. That's one of the benefits that we do have. Like we have Rogue One to kind of see where everything is, and you see like us rolling along to getting there. And it's going to be fun to see how they bridge the gap, because I think they've done a good job of it so far, but they've only got 9 more episodes to get us to that point. So there's a lot of things going to have to come to a head very quickly to kind of get us to that point. But I'm excited to see what they're building to. You've got, 9 episodes left to get us there, and it's a fun journey. These time jumps are going to be interesting to see how they handle it, because we don't have the first one yet. So I don't know how jarring it's going to be when we get to episode 4, where we left off with episode 3. So kind of to see how they marry things and the way they drive its story. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like this being a story-driven tale, this is where I think Star Wars is at its best, because the action stuff is always good. It's always fun to see, space fights and lightsaber battles and all that. But at the end of the day, there's still story-driven, narrative-heavy, like adventures that we can go on, that I think Andor does a better job than a lot of others have done in capturing that magic of storytelling and drama. And, even now with some of the introductions of comedic elements to it, like there's a lot of really fun elements at play here, and this is when Star Wars, I think, is at its best, is when you get to that really narrative driven, character driven type stuff that I think they do a really good job of here, and I'm excited to see where they go moving forward. But Andor episodes 1 through 3 of season 2 are available now on Disney Plus. 3 episodes a week for the next 3 weeks, dropping every single Tuesday night. Go check it out. Come to our social medias if you're watching it along with us. Let us know what you're thinking if you're going on this journey with us too. We're excited to talk about that with you, but a lot of fun ahead for Andor. We're excited for it.
And you could probably say that Sinners was one that kicked off kind of our big spring into summer movie season, but we got to know this week is one that's really kicking it off because we have Marvel's Thunderbolts is here. This is our first big Marvel property of the year that's going to be kicking off into potentially leading up to Doomsday and everything that's happening. Huge. We don't know how well connected, but we already know that there's going to be 2 extra credit scenes, so stay all the way through the credits on Thunderbolts. But we finally got Thunderbolts in theaters. I'm really looking forward to it because kind of like Andor, it looks different. Like they've marketed differently. It's filmed differently. Cinematography looks different, the way they're potentially handling action. But I'm really looking forward to it because I'm a big fan of Bucky and how they handled him in the Winter Soldier, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. And it feels like it went away from that for a little while. And now in here, at least it looks like we might get some more bits and pieces of that Captain America, Winter Soldier Bucky, who's, flipping cars. But he's also doing comedic things, as you see in the trailer. He's putting his arm in the dishwasher and stuff. Sure. But it feels like action-wise, we're getting that Bucky back.
Yeah, which is exciting. That's one that, like you said, it's kicking off a big summer season of movies. Like we talked about it before. We've talked about it on this side. There's so many incredible films that are still to come out this year. Like we just talked about it before. July is going to be absolutely insane with 3 huge blockbuster films coming out in July alone. Like this is the real kickoff now to blockbuster season, and I'm here for it. Thunderbolts is the perfect kickoff for that for me. You said Sinners is holding up really well. Like I know we don't talk about box office a ton here, but from what I've seen, Sinners is only getting a 10% drop
or less
in their theater run, which goes to show how strong word of mouth is. And this is why I'm looking at you right now. Look me in my eyes when I'm telling you this. Go see these films in the theater. This is a good example of how good word of mouth can keep a movie in the theater for a longer time. This is an original story. It's getting a lot of love. It deserves a ton of love. Go back in our archives to last week's episode and see what we thought about the film, but this is what we're talking about. It's so refreshing to see positive word of mouth spread about a film, that it has such a strong showing in week 2, that if you give these films a chance, they can have longer runs and you'll get more stories like this created. I know we're excited to talk about Marvel and the MCU, but I can't give them enough credit for how well Sinners is doing it. It's the lowest week over week drop off in a couple decades, from what I understand. Like it's amazing how well that film is doing.
For a horror film, it's just
unprecedented. Just
all expectations, everything, like from what it's making, what it's going to do. Like it's been incredible. And I'm with everybody else with a little shame on Variety with how they tried to paint Sinners. Like,
terrible.
Well, it did this, but it still has a lot to go to meet its budget. And like most, you could call it a blockbuster film, but most films like that, an original film, they're not making their budget back. There's very few films that make their budget back in the first weekend, unless you're Avatar, but although Avatar's like $500 billion for the production on it, or a Marvel film, a big Marvel film like Endgame or Infinity War, you're not making your entire budget and everything you spend on the movie back in the first weekend. That's why multiple weeks are important, but for them to kind of talk a little trash, like, oh, you're not getting your budget back and stuff like that. That's horrible reporting. It didn't make its budget back, but every aspect of it was over the top, exceeding all expectations. So, like, please do better.
And guess what? They might do it in week 2.
Yeah, but there's potential, because we record on Sundays, so you don't get the final numbers until Monday. You get the estimates on Sundays, that it's looking like it made about $25 million or $45 million this weekend. It's $25 million for episode 3. But $45 million for this weekend. They could potentially be over $50 million by the time the final numbers are out, which is incredible for an independent, I guess you could call it an independent, smaller film like this, an original film like this. To have that sort of second weekend is incredible, and it's a movie that well deserves that as well. And Marvel, let Ryan Coogler have full control over Blade, writing, directing, everything. Give him Blade right now.
Yeah, get this movie made. Get Ryan Coogler on board. He's fantastic. But yeah, it makes me so happy to see that movie doing as well as it is, and it's sustaining its power at the box office like that. I love that. That means people are talking about the movie. People are going to see it based on recommendations from their friends. Word of mouth is spreading. It's getting a lot of positive buzz and vibes, and absolutely deserved it. And couldn't be happier for the success that movie's
Here's the thing through this whole week, like it had a fantastic Monday and a better Tuesday and even better Wednesday. Like it just kind of built from word of mouth and everything else. And like, I do hope it has a long theatrical run so it can make a lot of money for it. And yeah, just great on Ryan Coogler for that. But yeah, we've got Thunderbolts. We'll see, Thunderbolts is probably going to cut into what it does some, but we're going to see exactly if a Marvel movie, because the Marvels and the last few Marvel films that come out haven't been as well received and had that longevity, especially Captain America Brave New World didn't, I still don't, I think it barely made back to where its budget was and everything. I don't know if it ever exceeded it, but it got close, but it was a very slow, long trickle before it did. We'll see if Thunderbolts can come out the gate a lot bit higher. This might be a Marvel film that needs that word of mouth after people see it. And if it's really good, to get people who are a little pessimistic about Marvel, because the last few phases have been a little more hit and miss than the Endgame and Infinity Saga and stuff. So we'll see exactly how Thunderbolts performs to see how big of a hit it's going to be, because you have a few weeks until Lilo and Stitch and Mission Impossible Final Reckoning comes out before it's got some huge full competition to go against it. So we'll see how Thunderbolts can do.
Yeah, it'll be telling with the way it's done. Early reviews of it have been very positive. I'm excited for that. I'm excited to check that one out for sure.
Yeah. On the streaming side, we have a movie on Prime Video called Another Simple Favor. So this is Anna Kendrick and Blake Lively comedy. Again, there's so much controversy around Blake Lively and stuff. We'll see how this performs for Amazon or not, but that will be out on May 1st.
Yeah, definitely one to check out for sure. I haven't seen a trailer for it yet, so don't exactly know what it's about. But, I mean, you got two very high-profile actresses in it, so it's definitely one to check out for sure.
And we've talked about films being able to have that longevity in theaters to make their budget back and make some money. This is an example of another one that really only got the 18-day window because it came out on the 11th. It's dropping on April 29th. It is Drop. It's just the iPhone airdrop horror film that we both kind of thought was going to be interesting. We haven't had a chance to check it out as well, but again, 18 days and it's already on demand.
I know, it's a shame, but it's one that I definitely plan on checking out when it comes on demand.
On the TV side, we have the season 2 debut of The Walking Dead: Dead City on AMC on May 4th. Again, I still haven't gone back and finished the last season of The Walking Dead because I just kind of got a little disconnected from it, and I haven't got into any of these spinoffs because I haven't finished the main series. So it seems like it's doing well. All the spinoffs seem to be being well received, so it's starting to get that itch back to go back and finish The Walking Dead and see if I do in it. But The Walking Dead is one of those prime examples where you're almost maybe doing too much because it's really hard to stay invested for some, especially if you have busy lives and families and everything else, to stay connected because there's so many different series. I mean, you have the main Walking Dead series, you had Fear the Walking Dead, you had, I forget the one that was even shorter lived. Then you have the Daryl Dixon spinoff, you have this spinoff. There's so many different shows to try to stay up on. I mean, if you're one like, Rick and Michonne, which I haven't watched yet either, it's like, it's overloading to some. Like, well, I want to watch everything, but how do I have time to watch 15 series?
You got to prioritize, I guess. Yeah. You got to make some time for it. But yeah, it's one that built an entire universe, and it was just the biggest thing. And then you have that crux moment that turned a lot of people off to it. And then, it just, had its issues with multiple showrunners and different other things, some infighting with a lot of stuff. And, the way they even marketed themselves was a sort of point of friction for a lot of people. And, it's one that the completionist in me has to go back and finish it at some point. Like, I have to finish that show.
Yep.
And then we'll see if it ends in an okay way, I may go and check out some of the spinoffs, which, if you'd asked me like 7, 8, 10 years ago, this wouldn't be a problem, but here we are, and it is. So
yeah, one of my biggest annoyances was just how one of the big appeals of The Walking Dead, and we're going off on a tangent real quick, but it was, you didn't know what was going to happen. Anybody could die. Anybody could have something to happen. And then once you got past the Negan part there, and they started doing the spinoffs and everything, like you were told Andrew Lincoln was leaving the show before he did. So that ruined any like build up for emotion that you had with him. And then you had Michonne leave, and that was known, and then you get the Daryl spinoff announced before the season's over. So like, well, he's going to survive because that's a sequel series, and they just kind of ruined themselves with marketing about telling you about all these spinoffs and all this other stuff before the main series was done. Like, well, I know they live, and I know they live, and now I know Negan and all of them live. It's like, so where's my investment?
And that's the marketing part that I was alluding to. Like they did such a good job of keeping that mystery for so long. And then when they ripped the Band-Aid off, it was just like a disgusting open wound that you just had to deal with. Like, okay, we're telling you these people are leaving, so what's the point in staying emotionally invested in a story like that you had done such a good job of keeping that mystery alive, and you were just openly talking about people leaving the show. And it's just like, I get it. Even if they're doing it, you don't have to tell people, you know what I mean? Like you can tell them about it after the fact. Like, hey, we wrote Rick off the show because his contract was up.
Especially with Rick, it was every week was like, you have 3 more episodes, 2 more episodes, 1 more episode before Rick is gone forever.
Yeah, here's the last episode of Rick Grimes until we come back with a spinoff series like 6 years later, because we ticked everyone off and we had to do a little bit of fan service. But
yeah, because they announced he's leaving, and then it's like, oh, he's going to have a movie and he's going to have a TV show and stuff too. So he's not gone for good. You did all that before he was gone.
Right. It was just so poorly handled. But yeah, definitely.
Sorry for the tangent.
Yeah, I know.
Every time I talk about The Walking Dead, it just brings all that
emotion
back.
because we were so emotionally invested in it. No, I totally get it and understand. We're on the same page there for sure. But that's going to do it for this week's episode. We can't thank you enough for your continued support as always. Coming up next week, we will be reviewing Marvel's Thunderbolts with an asterisk. So we'll talk about that hopefully next week. And we're also going to be talking about episodes 4 through 6 of Andor Season 2. Excited to continue that journey as well. But until then, I'm Josh, he's Brad, and we'll see you next week.